It's the Newcastle harbour now! It can't be done, sir! We'll never lay a course to the harbour in this nor'easter! Ready about! Stations for stay! I can't hold this course, sir! The wind has us! We'll be on our beamers! Let fly the sheets and tabs! It's a rock! A rock off the leeward bow! Sir! A devil's hook!
Captain Charles Selleck was there that fateful night, October the 8th, 1804. The night the Speedy, its passengers and crew, disappeared into the blackness of Lake Ontario. I can remember it as if it were yesterday. She was overdue. Darkness is falling and the wind howling out of the northeast. Although it was early October, it was all I could do to get the fire lit in the wind and driving snow. I reckon Paxton saw it, because she seemed to come about. But to no avail. The Speedy should never have been on the water, let alone in an autumn gale. It had already been retired once, you know. I'd wager that the holds were so flooded that the decks were nearly awash by the time it got here. Who would have imagined the loss of the Speedy to have had such consequences? No one is sure how many were on board, but to have all those great community leaders, judge, solicitor general, lawyer, interpreters, high constable, on that boat, in that storm. We were excited about the christening of our new courthouse, but because the murder took place a mere 100 yards inside this district, everyone involved was either from York or had to go there to get here. It was only rigid formality that forced them onto that boat. The whole thing could have been settled right there in the town of York. Not a soul was ever found. A few scraps washed ashore here, a few more on the other side of the lake, but that was it. On stormy nights, I swear that you can see the broken Speedy adrift on the wind, the passengers and crew arguing about how it all came to pass. Before I get to that, let me take you back to the beginning. Presqu'ile is the largest and most sheltered natural harbor between Kingston and York, what you now call Toronto. John Graves Simcoe, the founding Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, recognized this. The whole town of Newcastle had been laid out, so my father-in-law, George Gibson, and I built the first building, a magnificent three-story structure with a courthouse, jail, and hotel. We'd barely finished it when up near Lake Scugog, this Ojibwe Indian, avenging his brother's death, kills a white man. That's why they were coming here, to try this fellow, Ogatunnikut. Lieutenant Paxton, Thomas, is that you?
As my name is John Cameron, first mate on the Speedy, I'd said to my shipmates that this was a doomed ship. We hit bottom leaving York Harbour and had to put back in for repairs. I should have stayed ashore. It was a bad omen, that. 3 hours pumping the bilge and trying to caulk the leaks was of little use. We still had 2 men on the pumps all the way to Presqu'ile. Sorry, Captain Paxton.
I refused to sail the Speedy out of York because she wasn't seaworthy, but was countermanded. Orders right from the mouth of Lieutenant Governor Hunter. Only in the colony for 5 years, he was more interested in teaching the Indians a lesson than in the safety of our ships and our men. We, the members of the Provincial Marine, are but the poor cousins of the Royal Navy. Here, we are subordinate to the colonial army. Soldiers, ordering sailors. Conditions became so bad the cargo was being damaged, and Seaman Dobbs and Young deserted in June of 1802. Never enough money. Never enough materials. Never enough men. How I longed for my days with the Royal Navy. I sincerely hoped that we wouldn't encounter any heavy seas on the trip, but we paid the price for 6 years of neglect. My wife and 7 children were left in poverty, with no support.
It was a well-known fact around the lake how fragile the Speedy was becoming. It was beyond comprehension why this boat was chosen to be the carrier for the many good and important souls that went down with her. And in October? Why?
Time, my good man, and the rule of law.
It's Judge Cochrane.
The trip here on the Danforth Road would have taken far too long, and the September rains made parts of it practically impassable. Furthermore, the murder of Trapper Sharp took place a mere few yards inside the newly established boundary of your district. By law, the accused must stand trial in the district capital. And that, my friend, was Newcastle. Mind you, I wasn't on board the Speedy but a few hours before grave doubts about the integrity of the ship overwhelmed me. At the time I was counting my blessings, the Solicitor General Robert Gray was on board. The man of such intelligence and experience, we could at least pass the time with decent conversation, which, I can assure you, included a critique of the circumstances that compelled us to make this voyage.
That it did. The prisoner, by his custom, felt he had the right to revenge his brother's death, but he cannot take matters into his own hands. They must all understand that justice be done, and that a land can have only one law. However, I do regret not taking the offer of a coach ride here. That was a costly mistake. I was so looking forward to the trial. Facing Solicitor Angus MacDonnell across the courtroom always made for some spirited verbal sparring.
Aye, and you can bet you would have had a belly full of me by the time that trial was over. But the whole thing was purely political. That's all it was. 2 days it took us to travel from York on that poor excuse for a ship, with the holds full of water in the good weather. And then the storm struck. We heard someone yell that he'd seen a signal fire on shore. None too soon, we agreed. The ship was pitching wildly. The hull was stressed to bursting, and water was spilling down the hatches. We knew the voyage was almost done, and thank God as many of us were already seasick and fearing for our lives. Suddenly, there was a thunderous crash and a splintering of wood. The side of the boat opened up. Water as cold as ice gushed in. There was nowhere to go. It was all over in minutes.
The poor souls below deck would never have seen it coming. Maybe that was just as well. The young children and the prisoner in chains wouldn't have had a chance. Only someone on deck could know what really happened. James Minor?
We saw a fire. Knew we were on course for the bay. But on that night, it would have been like threading a needle on horseback. The ship was foundering, but Captain Paxton had completed the final tack. We'd taken so much water and were desperately overloaded. Then we hit it hard. So hard that the mainmast snapped. Saw that damned rock in the trough of the waves. The hull split open, the rigging collapsed, and then I was in the water. I saw Captain Paxton go overboard, but the wind and the waves pushed me away from him. The boat went down fast. The last thing I remember was that black night and the cold water. Cold, cold water.
I was sure I'd seen the Speedy, but only for a fleeting moment. Had she arrived safely on that fateful night, perhaps Newcastle may have developed into the successful administrative center that Simcoe had envisioned. Who knows? The ship foundered, its passengers vanished, and with them any hope for a district capital here. On March the 2nd, 1805, 5 months after the Speedy sank, the Act to provide for the administration of justice in the district of Newcastle was amended, describing this location as inconvenient. The capital was ultimately relocated to a fit and proper location. Amherst, what you now call Cobourg. Presqu'ile was then abandoned to the squatters. But that is a whole different history.